In this video, we're going to be walking through a beginner-friendly workflow for visual effects advertising using Blender and After Effects. Now, before we get started, I just want to say a massive thank you to all of my Patreon members. If you are curious about all of the perks I offer, I'll have a link down below where you can join. Also, I just quickly wanted to point out I have two courses now, one for visual effects advertising and then one for Blender visual effects in general, if you want to check those out and learn a little bit slower pace than this tutorial. Okay, so first things first, we need to go ahead and convert our video file into a image sequence just so it's a little bit easier to work with within this workflow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use DaVinci Resolve to do this. So all you need to do is drag and drop your footage into the timeline. We're going to go ahead and change the frames per second, and then let's go ahead and drop this inside of here. Now my footage is vertical, so we do need to go ahead and right click, go to the timeline settings and go ahead and check this, use project settings off. We're going to use vertical resolution, and I believe this footage was actually shot in 4K, so we're going to switch it to 4K right there. And then once all of those settings are done, we can just come over here to the delivery section. And then once we're over here, here are some of the quick settings I like to use. We want to go ahead and select a new folder location. I like to render in EXR is my favorite, and then RGB DWAA is what I like to select just to compress it a little bit more. And then coming over here, we're going to set it to start at the first frame. And that's pretty much everything that I set up for my image sequences. And then we can go ahead and just render that out, and you'll render out the entire image sequence. And then specifically for this workflow, we also need a still frame, and you'll see why in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the very first frame of my image sequence. So I'm going to hit I and then O to set a endpoint and out point. Make sure it's set to endpoint and out point right here, this range. And then all we need to do is change this. Instead of EXR, we need to select it to PNG now. And then all of these settings should be the exact same. This is totally fine. And just set a new folder location if you need, and just go ahead and render that out. And when you add them to the render queue, all you need to do is come up here and then just render those out. So if you've done this correctly, you should have a folder that looks like this with a bunch of EXR sequences or whatever image sequence that you want. So I have this folder right here, and then I have one still frame in a PNG format. And so those are both things that we need. And now we need to actually go ahead and talk about the camera movement. So as you can see in our video, we have some camera movement. It's shaking around a little bit. And so we need to go ahead and match that in with our CGI to get more realistic camera movement in our Blender program. And so what I like to use for this is to use FSpy. It's a program that allows us to estimate the focal length and all these other parameters for the camera. And it's going to really help us dial in that look. So go ahead and download FSpy. It's down in the description below. And this is where that PNG comes in. We can't use EXR because this program doesn't like EXR. And so we're just going to go ahead and drag and drop that first frame. We can go ahead and dim image off. And then I'm going to go ahead and just place some of these markers. So this is the Y-axis. So I'm just going to place some of these down here on the floor right there. And then this one over here, because we have a nice line here as well. It's a little bit blurry on frame one. So, you know, we can just get within margin of error. And then next we can do the X-axis. So I'm just going to use maybe this yellow line back here. You do want to make sure these separate axes are perpendicular to each other, but parallel to their same colored lines. And so that will just give us the axes inside of Blender so we can actually tell where the rotation of the camera and more importantly, the focal length. And so right around there is looking pretty good. We can double check that. If I place my origin point down here, we'll turn the X, Y grid floor on. And now you can see that's giving us a pretty good estimation of the grid floor. You can also see over here, if we check focal length, it's giving us a 30 number for our focal length. And so that's going to be really nice to have for camera tracking inside of Blender. And so after that is all set up, we can go ahead and Control S to save that and save it into a new location there. And let's go ahead and open up Blender. Okay, so inside of a new project inside of Blender, we need to go ahead and let's just reset everything. So delete everything there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a FSpy importer add-on. And so there'll be FSpy, the program, and then the add-on for Blender in the description below. So go ahead and download both of those. And then we need to come up here to File. We're going to go ahead and import and then go to FSpy. And so once you have that, you just want to locate that FSpy file that we just saved out. Okay, so here's mine. Let's just import that in. And now you can see we have a new camera in our scene and the ground is correctly rotated. If I go ahead and place a plane on the ground, you can see it's following the ground plane of the actual footage. And so that's very nice to have. Okay, so now we're ready to start camera tracking. Now in this specific shot, we have a lot of handheld movement, but it doesn't give us a lot of parallax data. And so in cases like this, I like to actually use a specific method that I've been using for a little bit with geometry tracking, where we're going to track some of the geometry. I actually tried to track this as a tripod camera movement, but it was giving me a lot of errors and stuff because I think the camera goes forward slightly. And so that gives us a little bit of errors there. So definitely go down in the description below and download the geometry tracker add-on. I use it constantly throughout my workflow, and it saved me a ton of time inside of Blender. So with that add-on installed, you can come to the side panel right here, and here is the menu. We need to go ahead and create a new geo tracker, and then we have some things we need to input. We need to first load in our clip, and so that clip is going to be our image sequence that we rendered out initially. So here is my EXR sequence. I'm just going to hit A to load in that clip right there. And then when we load in a clip, we do need to go ahead and analyze it. And so you can see right here, we have this analyze button. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. We can do the frame range. So it's 1 to 251. Let's just hit OK there and just let it kind of load the footage. Okay, so once that is finished, we have this geometry thing up here. Now this is a geo tracker add-on. And so we need to go ahead and track some geometry in our scene. Now, real quickly, I just want to show we are very blurry up here. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to start our keyframe range at frame 10, just to make it a little bit easier on us since we don't want to have to deal with that kind of blur at the beginning. But yeah, so we do need some geometry. That's the nice thing about what we did in FSpy is now we have this correctly lined up. And so actually doing the geometry to the scene is going to be super nice and easy. So let's go ahead, Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh. We'll add a plane right here. And then I'm just going to X, move that down. And then I also might bring a new window out here just to make it a little bit easier. And so we'll come to the top view. Then I want to hit S, we'll hit Y to scale on the Y. And then I'll go ahead and just make this plane a little bit larger over here just to give this more area to actually track. And that is looking pretty good. Again, we just need an area that has a lot of detail. And so I'm mainly looking at some of these kind of sections down here to have a lot of detail for the tracker to actually track some data. So yeah, so that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and set that to be our object. So right there. And then if we come down here, we now have a tracking window. We want to set it to camera since we want a camera track. And then we're going to go ahead and start the pin mode on frame 10. Now, really quickly, you do want to go ahead and check that your object is actually being correctly shown in the scene. You should see this little outline right here. If for whatever reason you're not actually seeing the outline once you come into this view, you might have to go ahead and make this a more 3D object. And so just extrude that down, make it a cube instead of just a 2D plane. And I find that that works to help eliminate that problem. But as you can see here, ours is working perfectly. And then all we need to do is on frame 10, let's go ahead and press this button to make it track forward. Okay, so the object tracked forward correctly. You can see that now we have it basically moving along with our entire footage. So let's go ahead and exit out of pin mode. And now you can see we correctly have our camera tracked in our scene. If I kind of zoom out here, you'll see that our camera is now moving instead of our object. And that is exactly what we want. So now let's deal with some of the CGI. This is where we start to actually dive into the final look of the shot. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and set up the correct scene scale. And that's to do with lighting, to do with depth of field, all of that kind of stuff that we need to have accurate measurements inside of Blender for. And so what I like to do in a case like this is let's go ahead and make a empty object. So I'm just going to make a plane axis empty in the world origin. Then I want to go ahead and parent this object right here. And then also our camera up here to our empty. So I'm going to select my empty last by holding control. You can see it's highlighted yellow up here, and that's exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and Control P, set parent to object. And now if we just select our empty up here, we can size it and scale it, and you can see that all of our information is remaining the same. And so now what we want to do is let's go ahead and make a new object. So we'll make a mesh cube, and the mesh cube in the world is set to 2 meters tall. And so that is roughly the size of a average human. And so I'm going to make it and use this guy in our scene as reference. So what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead I'm going to hit Z to move it up and down. And then I'm going to hold control to snap it on the ground. All I'm doing there is just trying to get the cube on our ground plane like that. And then I can just G, Shift Z and move it all the way to where our guy is standing right there. And the reason that's important is now this box should basically be as tall as this guy, and you can see it's not. So our scene is not scaled correctly. So in order to fix this, all we need to do is select that empty again. We'll hit S to scale, and then I'll kind of scale it down a little bit and then move our box back. So again, G, Shift Z, just move it to where he's standing. I did a little bit too much, so now he's way too tall. And so we'll just move it back something around like there. And now let's see, that's pretty good. That's within margin of error. It's not going to be super precise, but we don't need it to be since we didn't really take any measurements in the real world. So yeah, so that is set up correctly now. That is basically 2 meters. So we can go ahead and just get rid of that. That was just for, measurement purposes. But now we are actually ready to deal with the scene. So let's go ahead and model out this scene. This is to do with accurate reflections, accurate bounce lighting, all of that stuff. So let's quickly model this out. So I'm going to come over here. We can go ahead and extend this out a little bit more. So we'll GX move that all the way to the camera. And then we'll also size this out a little bit. So SY to scale that on the Y. So that is looking pretty good. Now, if we come back to the footage, we should notice that there's a little bit of a dip here if you think about like a train station. So we need the object to go down a little bit and then go across. And then there's also this back wall and a ceiling here. So we're going to try to match that as well as we can. So let's go ahead and come back to our model. I'm going to select this edge right here. We're going to hit E and then Z to extrude that downwards. I'm just going to guesstimate it's about that kind of much of a fall off there. Then we'll hit EX to move it over here. And then we want to look on our kind of window over here to align it to the bottom of this floor. I'm just going to be using the blue outline here, but we can hit GX over here. And right around there is when it connects to the blue outline right there. And then finally, what we need to do is EZ to move it up on the Z axis. And then same thing over here. I'm looking for where the ceiling actually meets the wall over here. So it's roughly around this area. And then finally, all we need to do is hit EX, move it all the way back here. And we have successfully modeled out the train station. We do want to make sure that we're not missing any bits. So you can actually see right here, we have a little bit sticking out over there. What I'm going to do is just hold Alt and select these edges over here. Then GY, just move that over there so we can have the entire section of the train station kind of modeled out there. So that looks pretty good. We are done with the train station model. What I actually want to do now is import in our objects. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using the Blender Kit add-on. It's an amazing add-on for you beginners out there. I highly, highly recommend it. I'm not sponsored or anything like that, but I do have an affiliate link down below if you do want to check that out. But yeah, so let's go ahead and go to Blender Kit. So once you download the program, you can just come over to this side panel, select the Blender Kit add-on. And then what I want to do is I want to search for Red Bull. This is the object that I'm going to be using, and it's totally free for you guys to use. Let's go to search filters and go to free first. And then we can just kind of scrub throughout here until we find the bottle. Yeah, so here is the energy drink. We can have this and just click and drag that into the scene down here. And now we have our drink into the scene. Let's go ahead and start organizing some stuff. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to make a new collection. We'll name this Can. And then I'm just going to place this Red Bull energy drink collection inside of that collection. And then this one up here, we actually have a few other things. So we have this plane. And so with that selected, we can come over here, right click. I'm going to go to parent and go down to clear parent and keep transformation. That way we can actually move around this plane. And the reason I wanted to do that is to make a new collection for it. So I'm going to name this shadow for now. I'll place the plane into our shadow collection just to organize some stuff a little bit. Yes, that is our can in the scene now. Let's go ahead and scale this way up. So I'm going to select this empty and just scale that all the way up. Now this is also probably a good time to go ahead and do some render settings, just because it's looking super ugly right now and Blender sets up some automatic things. We need to go ahead and go to cycles, and then we're going to go render on our GPU. I'm going to denoise with optics for my viewport. And then on my render, I'm going to denoise with Open Image AI using my GPU right there. Let's just set this down to 512 for now. And then this we can set down to 128. These are kind of just the settings I use for speed inside of Blender. So yeah, so we have this right now. I'm going to actually go ahead and decrease the size of my empty for my can, just so it's a little bit smaller. But let's go ahead and rotate it 90 degrees on the X and 180 degrees on the Z. And then just place it over here. I'm basically just placing where I want the kind of bottle to be and everything. So right here, let's come over to the film tab. I'm going to change on motion blur and then change transparent on just so I can see this guy. Also, while we're at it, we can go ahead and make this camera. You can go to background images, and I'm going to make it, instead of the linear color space, we're going to do sRGB just so it's a little bit more like how we actually see the footage in the compositing stage. So yeah, so let's make this a little bit bigger. I'll Alt H to unhide our little plane again. And so we'll just make that a little bit bigger and then move that over here, and then R double tap Z to rotate it like that, just so it's placed in a kind of cool location. Something like that looks pretty cool. I might even make it a little bit bigger. So something like that. And then we also need to raise it up again. So let's raise just our can up like that. Yeah, so that is what I want the can to kind of look like. Let's go ahead and duplicate some of the cans. And so in order to do that, I'm just going to move this on the Y over here. And then if I go ahead and I can duplicate this collection, so duplicate that. And now we have a brand new can right here. And so we'll G, Y, move that over here. And then we'll R, double tap Z to kind of give it some random rotation there. And we're just going to do the exact same thing. So right click, duplicate collection. We're going to select the new one, G, Y, move it until it's kind of over here. Then R, double tap Z. We'll make it something cool like that. Now let's do it one more time. I believe I have 4 for my final thing, so we'll just do it one final time. So again, super simple. Just kind of position it however you want over there. So yeah, so now we have all 4 of these. We do need them to be parented together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the empties. We only care about the empties because the empties are what is driving the location. And so we'll go ahead and select all of those, Control P, set parent to object. And so now this back empty is basically controlling all of our different train assets right there. And so yes, that is pretty much it. Let's G, Y, move that over here, and let's do some quick animation. I'm going to hide this plane. So at the very start of the footage, of course, I don't want anything there. So I'm going to go ahead and click this empty. This is where we're going to be adding our keyframes to. I'm going to go ahead and hit K and then a location keyframe right there. And then we'll go all the way to, I don't know, like 180 maybe. And then G, Y, we'll just move it all the way over here until the Red Bull thing is like right here. And so that is where I want that. We're going to hit K and then L for location again. So now we basically have 2 keyframes and it's going to animate to our actual thing. And so that is looking pretty good. And so yeah, that looks pretty good right now. You can play around with the animation, get whatever you want. If you want something different, you know, have some fun with that. But that is pretty much the animation. We are done with that. Now we have to worry about lighting and then finally rendering this out as a CG pass. So we'll go ahead and go to render settings. You can see we can't see our background anymore, and that's because this entire thing is basically just a basic white texture. So we need to go ahead and deal with some texturing. I'm going to switch this view up to shader editor, and then we can go ahead and make a new material. I'll just name this footage for now. And then we can Shift A, I'll add a image texture. Basically what I want to do is I want to project the footage texture onto our object that we made. And so the way I do that is I go ahead and plug this color into the base color. And this pink means that there's no texture assigned to that right now. And so we can go ahead and open up. We want to open up our image sequence that we made before. So right here, we can just hit A and open up our EXR sequence. And then I'm going to select auto refresh on just so it updates to the current frame, whatever frame we're on. And then right here, we also do need to go ahead and first, let's just make the color of our sky way much just so we can see the actual material. We'll play around with lighting in a little bit, but you can see that looks super ugly. What we actually need to do is let's come up to edit preferences, go to add-ons, and let's go to Node Wrangler. This comes free with Blender, so you just need to enable that. And then with this add-on, what that allows us to do is hold Control T, and we can now do a texture coordinate and mapping node. And all we need to do is set this to window instead of UV. And so wherever we're going to be seeing this, and since we're seeing it through the camera, it's going to project that to the camera's point of view. And so that now that that's set up, we pretty much have everything. I like to change the roughness down a little bit and then also change the specular down just so it's not as reflective. And so we're getting more accurate information there. Also, I do want to go ahead and set this instead of repeat. You can see we're having some like weird things on the side of our camera. I want to set this to mirror just so it's a little bit more clean cut kind of stuff like that. Very important for reflections, if that makes sense. Yeah, so that is all of the texturing done for our scene. Just again, getting some of that texture for some of our reflections. You can see our bottle is now reflecting some of this yellow, and so that's very nice and will give us some more accurate data there. And so yeah, so we have this now. We are ready to start talking about lighting. So let's kind of bring this over here. Actually, I'm going to turn this back to our 3D viewport just so we can have our render view over here and our clean kind of viewport view over here. So yeah, so that is all of that set up. Now, if we come back to the footage, we can see that we have these lights going across the top. And so I want to try to recreate that. Let's Shift A. I'm going to add a light. I like using area lights as my personal favorite light setup. So we're just going to bring that kind of up top to the ceiling. We're going to move it back until it's roughly around the same area there. And we also need to affect the shape. So I'm going to hit S and then X to scale it down like that. And that is roughly around the shape of some of these lights up here. It's not going to be perfect, but I don't really need it to be. So yeah, so we have that light right there. Let's GY move it over here. That'll be that light right there. So yeah, so that is that light done. We can go ahead and I'm going to hit Alt D to make a duplicate. And the reason I'm doing Alt D instead of Shift D is because now we can actually control all of these lights at the same time. And you'll see what I mean in a little bit. So let's Alt D again. Just keep going down the line. Alt D like that. Alt D. Just going all the way down to get all of our lights. I might also need to move some of these back on the X just a little bit. So like there, I'm just eyeballing it for this scene. It doesn't need to be super precise like that. Yeah, so that is pretty much the lighting setup here. You can see it's now giving us a little bit of lighting here, but it's not enough. We do need to push it a little bit. That is why I made instances. That's why we did Alt D, is because now we can come to this lighting panel here. We can change up the power, and it does it for all of them. We don't need to do it for each individual one. All of them are going to have the exact same settings. And so now we have some more lighting in our scene, which is looking really nice and matches really well. You can also maybe add a few more lights in here. We'll go ahead and add in another kind of area light, kind of in maybe over top here, just to kind of make some more ambience in the scene. So right here. And then this one, you can see it's actually reflecting onto the bottle. I don't like that. I'm going to go ahead and turn multiple importance off. And so it's not going to reflect anything. It's just going to cast light, if that makes sense. So we're going to go ahead and change that power up a little bit. And then also the size I need to increase as well. And so, yeah, so just getting out some of those really, really dark areas right here. We're still having a little bit of kind of weird dark areas, but I think that's to do with the actual footage. And so, yes, that looks pretty good. We're even getting some of the reflection of our guy in there, which is going to be really nice for compositing. Let's go ahead and start setting up some of our compositing. So you can see we have all these nice collections here. We have all of our cans in the can collection. We have our shadow and the or our plane in the shadow collection. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and set this to be a shadow catcher. Because right now you can actually see, we can still see the rendered view of our texture setup. Basically this texture, we just want to be our shadows for our scene. And so in order to do that, we're going to go to Object and down to Visibility. We're going to set the mask to Shadow Catcher. And so what that does is now in the scene, we can only see that it's casting shadows a little bit like on our back wall and everything like that. So that looks pretty good. Just for the sake of compositing as well, I noticed we have a lot of dark areas. And so what I'm actually going to do for this shot and what I did for my own shot is I'm going to come down to color management and we're going to change the exposure up a little bit. So something like that, again, I just don't want to crunch all that data. I'd rather have that data there and then pull it back a little bit in compositing than not have that data at all. And so as you can see, now this black area over here is much more lit. And so we can have that data to actually have to, composite in our scene. So yeah, so that is pretty much it. Let's go ahead and get a render image out just to see if everything is set up. So I'm going to come here and then go to render image. Okay, so here you can see we have this result. We basically just have our can in here, and there is some motion blur. Some quick things I want to see is I want to see if I can take this little thing out. I don't know what that is. That might be the ceiling. So if that's the case, then that's totally fine. But we'll definitely have to check out this line. And also the motion blur is too much. I don't want it to be that much. And so we'll dial that back a little bit too. So first of all, motion blur, we can just come over here. I think I set it to a 0.2 for my final render, just decreasing the shutter there. And then right now, let's figure out what that line is. And so we can come over here. And yeah, it looks like the ceiling line right there. And so honestly, I'm not going to really deal with that. That's totally fine for me. You probably won't even see it in the final render. And so that's totally fine. So yeah, so we are done with that. We can go ahead and set up our final render settings. So we're going to come over to compositing, reuse nodes, just make sure your render layers is plugged into the composite. I'm going to be doing my compositing in After Effects, so we don't have to really do anything right here. So let's go to output. You want to, of course, save a new folder location. We are going to be rendering this as a PNG sequence. So PNG RGBA, 15% compression ratio is totally fine. And so with all of that set up, we are ready to render this out. So yeah, so just set this up to render overnight and then render and animation right there. After that is finished rendering, you should have a folder that kind of looks like this, a bunch of image sequences as PNG files. And so we need to go ahead and composite that all together. And that is where After Effects comes in. Okay, so with After Effects, let's go ahead and I'm going to right click and I'm going to import multiple files and we can go ahead and locate our folders. Okay, so first one, let's go ahead and get the footage inside of here. So just open EXR sequence, select there, import that in. And then we can come back out here. And next I want to do my CG pass. So we'll just do that. And then that's pretty much it. We can hit done there. Okay, so we have this right here now. One quick thing that we have to make sure is our frame rates match, which they don't. So we can just right click, interpret footage, go to main. I'm going to set this to 25 FPS right there, just so they both match and we won't run into any issues there. So let's go ahead and make a new composition down here. Now the color space is off, so we need to go ahead and convert that from linear to sRGB. So I'm going to come to effect. We can go down to color correction and go to color space transform. And I'm going to change this first one. Instead of linear, we'll go to sRGB right there. And now we actually have the accurate color. Now, Blender also works in sRGB, and so we won't have to do any kind of color correction there as well. So next, let's come over to this project tab. Let's drag our PNG sequence over top of this. And then if you do remember, we started on frame 10 inside of Blender. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to go to frame 10 down here. You can see I'm on frame 10. And then I'm just going to move all this over so that the line up. Again, this is to do with our camera tracking and everything, and just to make sure everything lines up there. Now, I did go ahead and render this out as a 1080p thing. And so if you did full 4K for your CGI, you can go ahead and leave this. But for my sake, I'm just going to go ahead and change this to 200% on the scale right there. And so, yeah, so now everything should line up and we have everything looking good and accurate. Now, first thing I want to tackle is I want to go ahead and get our guy back in front of our actual thing. And so in order to do that, I'm just going to go ahead and we'll go ahead and copy and paste our layer up here, put it above our main layer. And let's double click inside of there. And I'm actually going to be using a tool inside of After Effects called Roto Brush. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And I'm just going to go to the very first frame. So we'll go to frame 10 again. So like right here, right there. And then we'll kind of zoom in, and I just want to click and draw onto our guy just so we can select his outline right there. And so that is looking good. Let's hold Alt to kind of get this middle section out, and then also his head up here. And this one is actually pretty easy to go ahead and kind of roto brush. It does a pretty good job for this scene. So we'll do that, and maybe a little bit more on his ear there. So that looks good. You can, of course, go throughout and, make sure everything is accurate. If you want to, go forward a little bit, it'll go ahead and try to, estimate where he moves and everything. I've noticed that it does a pretty good job for this scene. So I'm going to go ahead and hit freeze. Freeze just freezes all of the frames. So it's locked into place and it doesn't move around or anything. So let that kind of render out and come back after. Okay, so once that has finished, you can exit out of here. We want to go back to the main composition. And now that has pretty much done exactly what we want. You can see we cut out the guy. Now it is a little bit of a weird kind of look now. So let's style this in a little bit more. I'm going to increase the feather ever so slightly. We're going to go to maybe we'll try 20. See if that works. Yeah, so that feathers that out a little bit, just kind of blurring that edge. Then I'm also going to reduce the chatter by 15%. Then we can also use motion blur here. And so those are the main settings that I kind of use. If you do notice anything like these black kind of lines, if you kind of really zoom in, that's where you can maybe shift edge. And so we'll shift that in just a tiny bit, not too much. You don't want to go too much into it because then it'll look weird. But yeah, so that just kind of cleans that up a little bit. That's kind of all I really did. And then right here is where we need to start color matching the bottle and the CGI and everything. And so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to come down here. We can go up to Effect, Color Correction. Now for this, I like to use the curves. We'll use curves right here. And so overall, the gamma is way too bright. So we need to darken everything down like that. So that's already looking much, much better. Now the blacks are pretty good. I think the whites could use a little bit of a decrease. So we'll kind of decrease those a little bit right there. So these are just the highlights over here. And then also the saturation is way too much in my opinion. So that's where we can come to Effect, go to Color Correction again, and we can go to the Hue Saturation node. So right here, we'll place that above our curves because I want to do that before. And then the Master Saturation will just kind of tone down a little bit. I'm trying to match some of the values back here. And so that is already looking much better. I do think everything overall is still looking a little bit too bright to me. So that's where I'm going to come over here. We'll add another color correction to, we'll go to levels right here. And then that's where I can mess around with some of these more kind of values here. So we'll make that a little darker. The black point and stuff we'll make a little bit lighter, just ever so slightly lighter. And this darker. And so that's matching much better. I can spend all day, but those are the main kind of effects that I use to do color correction like this. So that is looking much, much better. And so, yeah, so that is pretty much it. The final kind of thing I want to do is maybe do a little bit of color correction. Now, for the final shot, I actually took this into DaVinci Resolve for my color and everything like that. But I'm not a great colorist. And so I'm just going to do some quick kind of things here to kind of introduce some extra color into the entire image. And so let's select all of these. I'm going to right click and we're going to pre-compose that. Hit OK, and then now we can go ahead and do some more effects. So we'll come over here. This is where I want to go ahead and boost the saturation of the entire scene. So I'll just boost all of that, and that's looking good. And then we'll maybe come and add some contrast. And so we'll go to brightness contrast, introduce some more contrast in our scene. Again, I'm not trying to push it too much, just some extra kind of cool quality of life features there. And so, yeah, so that looks pretty good. I'm not going to be worrying about grain or anything for this process. And this is a super easy shot. This is just going straight to social media. And so you won't really notice any grain or stuff in there. And so if you are doing this for more of a big screen format, then I would highly recommend you deal with the grain, the actual noise and footage grain that you have in the clip. But for this, it's totally fine. Okay, so real quickly, before I forget, we still need to add in our reflection. And so let's go back inside of our pre-comp. I'm going to duplicate our Coke CG pass, and then I can type in over here. We can just type in flip and then drag that flip asset onto here. And that basically just turns it upside down like that. And so we have that. And then next thing I need to do is go ahead and position this. So we'll hit P. I'll move this down on the Y just so it's like roughly around here. Now the camera tracking is going to be a little bit messed up, but we should be able to get away with it for this shot. And then for this, all we need to do is we need to go ahead and introduce some of those reflections back, just so the reflection looks a little bit more realistic. So I'm going to duplicate our original kind of footage pass. We'll put that over top of it. And then I want to go ahead and do a new effect. We'll come over here. I'm just going to type in Luma key. We need a Luma key right there. Place that on here. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to introduce some kind of breaking up of the reflection. And so in order to see that, we'll go ahead and do our luminance matte right there and set our track matte there. If you can't see that, you just have to toggle switches and modes, by the way. So now we have that. We can go ahead and we'll key out some stuff over here. So we'll do some of this threshold up. So now you can see we're just ever so slightly breaking up. I do want to key out the brighter, I think, though. So it's flipped like that. And then, yeah, so something like that is looking much better, just so we can actually have some breaking it up right there. And then we'll feather that a ton. So something like that is looking good. And then finally, we need to go ahead and change the opacity on this. So hit, I believe T is opacity. We can bring that way down right here. And that looks much better. You can see it's giving us much more accurate results. One final thing we can also maybe do is change some of these values up here. I may make the curves way less. So something like that maybe. And then the highlights will set back to normal. So something like that. And so, yeah, so just kind of introducing some more of the colors back in. We'll make the hue and saturation way less. So something like that. And yeah, I believe that's pretty much all I did for my reflections in my own scene to get kind of some, interesting reflections of the actual ground. We don't want it too much. So I'm actually going to decrease the opacity some more. So something like maybe a 5%. So just play around with this, get a result that you like. But that's how I did my reflections. Okay, so once we're finally ready for that, we can come back out here in our main kind of composition out here. We can go to File. We want to export that to Render Queue. And then in our render section, H.264 is totally fine for me. I'm going to go ahead and set a new folder location. So let's save that and go ahead and render the animation. Okay, so here is the final thing that we did from this tutorial. Now, of course, I did go back inside of After Effects and spent a couple of hours, really dialing in everything. This is really where most of the time comes in inside of a visual effects workflow, is really dialing it in the compositing section. And then I also took it into DaVinci Resolve for a final color pass. And so that's where I was really able to match everything and get a more cinematic feeling for the entire shot. But anyways, hopefully that gives you some more information about my own workflow and helps you out with any visual effects advertising that you might do in the future. Anyways, thanks so much for watching. Again, I have a Patreon and a few courses down below if you are interested in joining any of those. But thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.